computer. There we go. Okay, someone's voice and audio or
Mike, can we ask people to mute, because if there is a background sound, doesn't make sense.
I just muted everybody.
We should.
There we go. So I didn't mean to cut you off, Francine. I just muted everybody. So that way, only unmute yourself if you have a specific question. Okay, so the session is now recording, and thank you again for everybody for coming in. So I'm just going to share my screen, and there we go. And so our session is dodging and burning, and essentially this has got its roots in the old-fashioned darkroom. So this started a long time ago, where people used to have to take pictures with negatives. They take the negative, put it in the enlarger, and then the enlarger would have to enlarge the picture onto a piece of paper or print. But if they wanted something on the print to be a little darker or a little bit lighter, different from the overall print, what they would do is they would play with a little piece of cardboard, and they would try to hide the light from a certain area, so that light, there was a little less light coming to the paper on one place. Or if they needed more light in a spot, they'd put a hole in a piece of cardboard and let a little bit of light come through. And so, you know, burning was when more light would come through and it would make something darker on the paper, and dodging was when they tried to bring the light back and try to improve that. So that was the technique, and Ansel Adams and all kinds of people did this kind of processing to try to improve their pictures. So the burning essentially made something a little bit darker, and the dodging made things lighter. And in doing that, they were able to control certain sections. If a certain part of the mountain was in shadows, then Ansel Adams maybe would bring it out and bring it a little more detail. If the sky was a little too bright, he would, darken that, burn it in, and, get more cloud detail instead of having the sky sort of overexposed. So, it's good to always try to get things as good as possible in the camera and not have to do things in the dark room or in Photoshop. But there's always a little bit that can be done to improve your picture with dodging and burning. And the process for doing it nowadays is a lot easier. But the reasons for doing it are still very much the same. What we're trying to do is add emphasis to specific areas of the photo. And the most common way of doing that is vignetting, where you just take the outside edges of the picture and you make it dark. And so all your attention goes to the center of the image. And that was very easy in the old days. It would just be a big hole in a piece of paper, and you just kind of feather the edges of the paper. If you have parts of your image that are overexposed or underexposed, the overall image might be good, but there's just certain areas that happen to have a little bit more light or less light. Depending on how contrasty and how dynamic the range was, you might have to compensate for exposure selectively. So we're not talking about exposure up or down, we're talking about changing the exposure in just a specific area. And that's when we start to dodge and burn. We can also improve contrast, and contrast is really, really powerful to make an image have more impact and have a little bit more wow. So what we're doing with dodging and burning, and we'll see lots of examples of that, is we're trying to kind of give the picture a little bit more punch. It's not, a vastly different picture, but it's just got a little bit more je ne sais quoi. And that's what we're trying to do with some of that stuff. And then dynamic range really talks about how bright is the bright in an area and how dark is the dark. And then if you're on a sunny day, the areas that are hit by the sun are very, very bright, and the areas that are in deep shade are very, very dark. And it's very hard for a camera to get everything from the lightest light to the darkest dark. In the old film days, we had a latitude of about 3 or 4 stops. Nowadays, we have a latitude of something like 5 to 6 stops. So our cameras are much more sophisticated than they were, 50 years ago. But still, it's beneficial to be able to control some of that. Now, there's other techniques. People use HDR and other things to blend photographs. But HDR, again, is a technique that just takes, 3 or more images and starts to blend them together to try to get the details out of the black and get the details out of the highlights and bring them all together. But it's uniform across the image. Dodging and burning lets you, pick a specific area and say, well, I just want this cloud to be a little darker. Or I want this little highlight on the side of the building to be a little darker. So if you do have a high dynamic range and you were trying to get details, this is where dodging and burning comes in very handy, is you try to get a little bit more details, but the details have to be there. There's still, if you're overexposed or underexposed by too much, then you can't really fix that with dodging and burning or any degree of correction. remember what you're doing with a computer when you try to make things lighter or darker is you're applying a mathematical formula. So if something is a certain level of brightness, let's say it's 50% bright, and you make it brighter, you make it brighter by, let's say, 10%. So 50 becomes 55. If you make it darker by 10%, then the 50 becomes 45. Well, it's easy when you have a number that's easily affected. But if you have a pure white, and so you're sitting there at infinity for light, well, 10% of infinity is still infinity, and you can't make it any brighter. And something that's pure black is 0. And so, 5% extra of 0 is still 0. So the blacks always stay black and the whites always stay white. You don't get any in between. So you need to still have proper exposure. Dodging and burning is not going to fix a bad image.
Talk about the looming crisis in Burundi. You always try online dating.
Someone's unmuted themselves?
Half an hour later.
Yeah.
There you go. Sorry, Gord, I cut you off there. Hopefully, if you had a question, just unmute yourself, but you've got some music or something in the background. Okay, so the key tools, and we're going to go into a lot of this detail for these. Oops, you unmuted yourself, Gord? Did you have a question?
No, I did not. No, thanks.
You
I'm
keep
going
doing
in
that.
to mute and unmute.
No, I just muted you. All right. So the key tools in Lightroom we'll be covering in fair detail. And I'll be showing you each of these tools and how they work and how they operate. The same tools are also available in Photoshop, or Adobe Camera Raw. But almost any product out there, whether you're using Photoshop or On One or Capture One or whatever, they all have very similar type tools. So once you understand the principles, it really doesn't matter what software you have. You can just use the same tools. And the way the tools work in terms of whether or not they're too light or too dark, or they make the pen bigger or softer, whether or not the edge is feathered or hard, all of those capabilities tend to be in all of these tools. So we'll walk through them a little at a time. Like anything, you can do too much, okay? If you go too far with your dodging and burning, then what's going to happen is the picture is going to look unreal. It's going to look a little sort of, garish, if you want, and it's just going to be too much. So, use the example of a chef who knows, just how much to season the food, and if you over season it, you've taken away from it's subtle and texture and flavor and so on. Lady who wears makeup can overdo it. The lady who wears perfume can overdo it. And anything can be overdone. So you need to be careful in terms of how much you're doing. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, but the nice thing is once you've done it, you can always kind of tone it back a little bit. So if you find you've overdone it a little bit, then you can tone it back, and we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But the interesting thing is to step away from your work after you've done it, go away, have a coffee, come back and look at it again. And you may find it, just still not quite enough, or, oh gosh, that's way too much. What the heck was I thinking? But while we're doing it, it sometimes it's happening so subtly. You're darkening something, darkening something, darkening something. And by the time you actually notice it, it's actually too much. So you got to learn to kind of be a little careful. Okay, if you do it too much, someone may turn around and look at a picture and say, hey, like that's a really cool edit. And obviously the emphasis is on the edit. People now look at it and say, hey, this picture is looks unreal or whatever. If you do it right, people look at the picture and say, oh, wow, that's kind of neat. So, I mean, this particular picture was done, to a fair degree, and this is where it started. So the original picture is in fact quite different from the edit, but the goal is still to have a picture that looks like it could have been made in the manner described. So try to keep the effects soft. You're trying to tone down some of the undesired highlights. Your eye travels to the brightest portions of the picture. So highlights tend to be something you want to be aware of. What are the brightest parts of the picture? And that's typically where people's eye will gravitate. You want to enhance contrast to give the picture a little bit of interest. And very often, if you're unsure what to do, how to mask something, or not mask, sorry, but to dodge and burn something, follow the natural highlights that are there. You know, try to make some of the darks darker and some of the lights lighter, and you'll find that I'm going to do a lot of that as we go along. Now, when we look at these tools, you'll find that they're a lot easier to use than the old darkroom. In darkroom, if you needed to dodge or burn an area, then, you know, burning is not too bad because you had a hole in the spot, and you can in the cardboard, and you could just, you know, use a hole in one spot and the rest of it received no light, and then use a hole in another spot and the rest of it received no light, and away we went. But when it came to dodging, you'd actually have to sit there with these, you know, little pallets and garbage, the cardboard and so on. And if you had to dodge 4 different areas, you'd have to do them all at the same time, because you can't just do one and then do the other and do the other, because while you're doing one, the other 3 are getting, you know, ample light. So it was a little trickier to do it in the darkroom. You'll find that when we're doing it in the electronic world, we can actually play with each portion of the image independently, and it's going to be a whole lot easier than we had before. Faces are probably one of the more challenging areas to dodge and burn. And if you look at the way makeup artists contour faces to try to bring the face out the way we want, and, you know, try to narrow a wide face, or try to widen a narrow face, to try to you know, change the shape of an oval face, or so on and so forth, they start to darken portions of the skin more than others. And they do that with makeup. We can do that with light when we're photographing, if you're very careful with your lighting. But if you're not careful with your lighting and you need to do a little extra afterwards, you can do it in the darkroom, sorry, in the electronic darkroom with dodging and burning. So study these types of charts if you're not sure, and you'll be sort of, you know, stepping in the right direction. So I'm going to walk you through each of these tools and sort of show you how each of them operate. And then once you have the basics, then we're going to go through a number of individual pictures, and we're going to do a couple of practical examples. So I'm going to stop there and ask if anybody has any questions. Spontaneous burst of silence. I like that. Okay, I see some things in the chat. Mike, please go full screen. Okay.
I have a question. Which software are you using?
So the software we'll be showing tonight is called Lightroom. It's from Adobe, and it's part of the Adobe suite that you can get as a photographer. I think it's $12 a month or something like that. Photoshop and Lightroom come together. I'll also be using the latest version of Lightroom. So if somebody's using an old version, like version 6, which was the last version you could get without the subscription, you'll be missing some of the tools, because some of the tools we're using tonight won't be available to you in those older versions. So I'll be showing you the latest and greatest, and you'll at least know what you're missing if you don't happen to have that. But the techniques that I'm showing you still work with a lot of other tools. So if you just understand the technique, as opposed to you click on this button and you do this, then you'll be fine. What I'll be doing is I'll showing you some of the more fancier things you could do with the Lightroom product.
Could you do these effects with an iPhone?
Yeah, there are products out there that do dodging and burning on your phone or on your tablet. Okay, look for selective editing, and you'll find that there's usually a place where you can just make a certain portion of your image darker or lighter. And that's all we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be darkening and lighting portions of images. So anything that any feature you can find in a program which lets you lighten and darken the picture selectively, not just, you know, make the whole picture lighter or make the whole picture darker, but to be able to say, I want the center of this flower to be a little brighter than the petals. That's what you're looking for, is that kind of individual thing.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Anyone else? Very good. Okay, I'm going to bring up my Lightroom, and I'm going to share that. Okay, so you should all have a copy of my Lightroom, and I'll just move that off there. All right, so this is the picture we had earlier, and if you look at where I started, whoops, I'll just go to develop module. I went to develop module hitting the D key, and this is like the before and after. So this is one of the ones we'll do a little bit later. But before we go there, I want to just show you some of the basic tools that are out there. So this is a gray card. This is one of the first things I do when I take pictures, is to get my exposure right, is I take a picture of a gray card. The model just holds it. I zoom in really, really close. And then I look on my camera and I look at my histogram. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get in the top right over here, the gray to be gray, the white to the black to be close to black, and the white to be close to white. And if it looks like this, then I've done the right thing. If it starts to look a little bit more like this, then I've done the wrong thing. The middle gray is not where it's supposed to be. And if I've gone over here, the middle gray is not where it's supposed to be. So I'm really looking to end up with something along these lines. So this is kind of the starting point. And I'm just going to use this picture as an example to show you some of the things that we can do to lighten and darken. So I have a dark, black, a white, and a gray area, but I can affect any one of those. So my three tools are here, here, and here. The first tool is the one that was always available in Lightroom in the earliest forms. You can hit it with, you can just come click on this edge here, and it just gives you a little area that you can draw with. And I can just draw and nothing seems to happen, because look at these sliders. These sliders are showing, whoops, my mouse is going nuts. I'm just going to disconnect my tablet for a moment. And I'm just going to plug it back in. And hopefully it's alive again. It's going nuts. Okay. All right. So these sliders essentially are saying do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing. I still have an area that I painted, but if I take that area and I make it very bright, you can see where I painted. Or if I make it very dark, you can see where I painted. So all I did is I just painted an area, but what happens to the area is left to be determined by these sliders. So these sliders determine what's going to happen either before the fact or after the fact. Let me just get rid of this. This is called an edit dot, and it just lets me affect the area I painted. I'm just going to delete it. Hit the delete key and it's gone. So now I can paint again. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make it very dark. And now when I'm painting, you'll see that I'm painting dark. If I delete it and I make it very, very bright, now when I paint, it's bright. So I can either set this first and then paint, or I can paint, and then even after I paint, I can do other things and change it afterwards. So the order is not important. What's important here is one area is selected by where I painted, and then what happens to that area is governed by my settings down this panel. So once I've painted, I can paint again and keep painting. And I can hit over here, it says erase. I can click on erase and I can start erasing areas. And I can go back to my brush and I can paint back in various areas. And it doesn't matter where I paint, I'm getting the same effect. There, and there is all the same degree of brightness. If I make the whole thing brighter, I'm just going to go to here. I've made this white, 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 that white, 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 that white, white. So what I just did is I went to a setting that I created for myself called white, and it just slides all of these to the far, far right. And if I change it to something that I created called black, it just changes all of these to the far, far left. So these are just shortcuts I created for myself. You can do whatever you want. The point is these sliders just represent what's happening in the area that I painted. So this is the most trivial and simple way of doing things. Now, if you had to paint this whole area all gray, if you wanted that whole area to be gray, I mean, it would take a long time. I could make the brush bigger. Whoops. I can make the brush bigger. So now I have a bigger brush and I can start painting a whole area and try to get it nice and even and so on. And, you know, and if you're not sure how close to get to something, there's actually something called auto mask. And auto mask essentially says, try to follow the edge of the line. So if I come down here, it tries to stay in the line and it doesn't go over a line. So if there's something that you're trying to paint, you can use auto mask. I don't tend to use that a lot. There's so many other ways of doing things, but it's just an example. So what I did is I painted here, and if I move it, you can see what I've painted, right? So I can move it around after I've painted, and that's sometimes handy and useful. I'm going to delete it again. Okay, so what we've talked about so far is just one tool, and that's the painting tool, and you can have a number of different controls. One of them is the size of the brush that you're painting with. The other one is the feather, and look at the outside edges. I'm hitting the square bracket key to make it bigger, or the other square bracket key to make it smaller, which is changing the size button, right? If you look at the square bracket key, smaller and bigger, and the size lever is changing as I go along. So I don't tend to use that. I just tend to use the brackets. So you see two circles, the inner circle and the outer circle. The difference between the inner and outer circle is the degree of feathering. And so the image is feathered, or soft, if you will, by a certain amount. If I make this really, really hard, then all of a sudden, oops, I went the wrong way. Oops. Now all of a sudden, I'm changing flow instead of feather. My mistake, folks. Here I have a feather of 0, and the line looks like this. A very wide feather, and the line looks like this. Right, so you see that it's got a fuzzier edge if you want. So that's what the feathering is, and we'll see feathering comes in very handy in a number of different areas. I'm just going to delete all of those. And now I'm going to do that. And I'm going to say, I just drew now with 100% flow. I'm going to draw now with 50% flow. And you see what happens when I make a line? It's just not very dark. I go over it again. It gets a little darker, go over it again, go over it again. Eventually I build it up all the way up to 100% because my density is 100%. So the difference between flow and density is flow is how fast you paint, and density is the maximum level. So if I bring the flow really, really down and I start painting, nothing seems to be happening, right? My flow is so low, but if I keep going over it, eventually it starts to build up. And if I were patient enough, which I'm not, eventually this will build up to 100%. I'll just bring up the flow a little bit more, and I'll just go again and again and again and again and again and again. And eventually it builds up to 100%. Okay, so that's as dark as the levers will allow. I can still bring it down here, right? I can kind of say, okay, it's at -4 exposure, but what happens if I want that to be a little less? And I want this to be a little less. I want this to be a little less. I want this to be, matter of fact, if I bring all of these back down to 0 by double clicking on effect, there's nothing there. Okay. The fact is it's still there. It's still selected. And if I hit the letter O on my keyboard, I can see where I've painted. What I'm doing in those areas is nothing, but those areas are in fact painted. So I can choose to do things with those areas, and there's all kinds of things you can do, like lightening, darkening, you can sharpen, you can even add color if you want. Let me just hit the letter O again. And then if I want, I can make something a certain color, whoops, make it color red or make it green or make it blue. Now that's not dodging and burning, but it's just showing you the fact that I can do lots of things in the area that I've painted. So if you know Photoshop and you understand the concept of masking, this is kind of like a default mask. It's a mask that you create. So I'll just get rid of this color. All right. So the concepts then are you paint where you want, and I'll just darken this for a moment. You paint with the degree of feathering that you want. Sorry, feather and flow. So this is how much you're painting is low flow, more flow, maximum flow. And then the density, and I'll go down to about here somewhere, and I'll paint somewhere over here. And I can go over this again and again and again and again. And even though I have 100% flow, it's never getting higher than, what is that, 18% density. If I want more density, I have to bring it up. And now I can add more density. And if I bring it all the way up, then I get more density. So I can add to it by adding density. Now here's one that a lot of people miss. If I paint with low density in Photoshop, it's adding 13% to what's already there. So in Photoshop, this would get darker, but in Lightroom, it gets reduced to 13%. So when you paint on top of something with a low density, you're actually telling Lightroom the maximum density I want is 13%. So if I start painting everywhere, I'm reducing this to 13% everywhere. Right? And if I bring it up a little bit, now I've increased that just area that I painted to 40%. And if I lower the flow, then it's going to eventually build up to 40%, but it's going to take me several strokes to get to 40% because I'm not painting with full flow. So it sounds like you've got a lot of control here, and it might seem overwhelming, but once you understand how these things can be used to benefit, it really, really powerful tools. So that's the one that's been around for a long, long time, and we'll walk you through several examples of these types of things. The other little trick that I'll show you now, and you'll see me use it a little bit later, is when I'm painting, whoops, I went to another photo, didn't mean to do that. I can paint freehand, but I can also hit a dot, hit the shift key and hit another dot, and it's going to draw a straight line for me. Okay, so I'm going to change the flow to 100%. I'm going to change the density to 100%. I'm going to change the feather to 0. And I'm just going to show you an example of dot, come all the way over here, dot, and I get a nice straight line. So you're going to see times when you want to dodge and burn, let's say, an area inside a building. Oop. And I can just draw, and I got my finger on the shift key as I'm drawing. So I can, I'm just drawing straight lines, and I'm just drawing them smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually I fill up the whole area. So, and then of course I can let go and just fill in the rest. But to get the edges, I sometimes use the shift key to get nice straight lines. Right, and then I can take these and reduce the effect, and then I can just, darken, 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 darken until I get just maybe these two squares about the same. Or I can go the other route and make the gray almost as bright as the white. All right, so, I can take the gray area and match it to the black, or take the gray area and match it to the white, or I can just double click on exposure. And that just sets this back to 0. So double clicking on any one of these labels brings it back to its default value of 0. Clicking on the effect button at the top just brings all of these settings back to 0. It just is an overall default. So I'll stop here if there's any questions. That was easy, right? All right. Okay, the next one we saw a lot of in the early part of Lightroom was the graduated filter. The graduated filter is unlike the drawing one where you draw precisely where you want. The drawing filter is you drag it from one place to another, and what it's giving you is 2 lines plus a center line. This is maximum effect, this is minimum effect, and this is about sort of the minimum. So if I double click, it doesn't show. I can put this little button here, and that's my effect. And I can move it around, I can rotate it, I can bring the line, and this is kind of, think of this as my feathering, right? I have very hard edge and very light edge. So let me turn on something here. Let's just go to white. And you can see that I'm making the edge really, really hard, or I'm making the edge very, very soft. And I'll just move the whole thing over here so it's easier to see. And let's change it to black. And it's still the same area that's been selected, right? And I can move it around, and I can rotate it, and I can change the feathering. And again, once I've done it, I can change it after the fact. I modify it and do other things after the fact. So it's fairly powerful, and it's really handy if you want to do something quick on the edges of a picture. So if I wanted to take, I'll just get rid of this. I'll just maybe darken a little bit, and I can say, okay, I would just want to darken the edges of the photo. And I'm just drawing a bunch of these things. Right, I've just drawn a bunch of them. Now, every one of them has a dot. This dot is for this one. This dot is for this one. This dot is for this one. This dot's for this one. So each of these can, whoops, I clicked not on the dot, but next to it. So I just created a new one. I'll just hit delete or undo, Control Z, and I'll try it again. And now I've captured the dot. Now these dots appear based on this setting down here. Auto means the dots appear when my mouse is on the picture. I come away from the picture and the dots disappear. So the dots only appear when my mouse is in an area where I could select a dot. If you set it to always, that means all the dots appear all the time. It doesn't matter where I move my mouse, all those dots are always there. So I just like to use auto, just that way I can evaluate my picture without the dots by moving my mouse off the picture. And of course, if you use never, then the dots never show up. And if you use selected, only the selected dot shows up. So this is the only one that's selected at the moment. But if I want to select another one, I'm not even sure how I would select another one since I can't see them. so it's not a feature I ever use. So my go-to approach is auto. Okay, now we can use these in conjunction with one another. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these graduated filters. I can go back to this one and I can draw, whoops, and I can draw something and it's independent, right? So this thing that I drew freehand is this dot over here, and I can move it, but I can also move each of these individual ones. Whoops, I'm still on the wrong tool. I'm still here, which I didn't mean to do. I'm gonna hit delete. I have to go back to this tool. And then when I come back, this dot doesn't show because I'm not in the, whatever tool, what's this called anyways? The adjustment brush. I'm not in the adjustment brush tool. I'm in the graduated filter. So I can see this dot. And you gotta click fairly precisely. And I've got a very, very sensitive tablet here. So I have to be very exact where I put things. So I can select each dot. Now, if I wanna make this one darker, I can. But now the problem is if I made that one darker and I want this one to be darker, I have to kind of repeat this process again. And I have to go and do each one. Now, if I remember the setting and I go over here and I say, okay, the reading is 2.49, I can come over here and bring it down to 2.49 or very close to it anyways. And I have to do each one individually. There's no easy way to group them all and say, make them all darker. So sometimes it's better to think about, do you want 5 different objects that you control independently, or do you want to just have something which is controlled all at once? So we'll see lots of examples of that, but I just wanted you to understand that every dot is individually controlled. And if you really, really, really need to keep something consistent, you can create a preset. Sometimes I create a temporary preset like this one over here that says temp, whatever that was. And it just maintains certain control. So I'll go back to this one here. Oops. And that was 2.49. I can say down here, save as new preset, and I'll call it, TMP1. And now I can come over here and click this guy. Oops. And I can say, okay, make that TMP1, wherever that is down here. And then go to the next one and make that TMP1. And go to that. Now I know they're all going to be the same, and change that to TMP1 and so on and so forth. So that's an example of one way to make sure that all these dots are the same if that's what you really want to do. But we don't usually have to have that level of precision. So I'm just going to hit reset here, just throw everything away. Actually, I had that as black and white once upon a time. There we go. We'll do that. So we've talked about the adjustment brush where you do things freely. We've talked about the graduated filter brush, and there's 2 types of graduated filter. There's also something called a radial filter, which is also the same thing, but rather than drawing a straight line, you draw a circle. And so you're drawing circles, and you have 1, 2, 3 circles now. And again, the last one you selected is the one that's being controlled. If I want this one, then I can control that one. And if I want to control this one, I control it. So some little tricks, I'll do Control Z, undo 1. Oh, okay, that's not going to work. I just selected this one. I'll hit delete, select this one, delete, select this one, delete. Okay, some little tricks as you go along. The shift key means that when you're drawing a circle, you're actually getting an exact circle as opposed to an oval. So holding the shift key forces you to have a pure circle as you go along. Undo this one and this one. With this one, if you drew a line, if you hit the shift key, it forces it to be straight up and down, or conversely, pure horizontal. So it's either pure vertical or pure horizontal if you draw a straight line. And if you use this brush, again, just a reminder, whoops, come on, get there. This one was freehand, except if you use the shift key, you end up drawing straight lines. So shift affects all three of these things. I'll go reset again, and we're almost done, folks. And then we can get into some examples. When you draw the radial filter or the graduated filter, you just end up drawing a circle. But after you've drawn it, unlike the adjustment brush, you can actually adjust after the fact the degree of feathering. And I'm looking for it. Where is it? Here it is. So there's a very hard edge circle, and there's a very soft circle. So even after I drew it, I can choose to make it a little softer, a little harder. Okay, you had the same ability here, but you did it a little differently, right? What you had to do is you had to take this line and move it in and make it harder, or move it out to make it softer. So with the two graduated filters, the circular one and the straight one, you can adjust the feathering after the fact. With this guy, when you draw it, if you change the feathering after the fact, it just affects the next time you draw. So the original ink or selection or whatever you want to call it, it stays the way it was. So you'd have to feather that yourself. And if you wanted to, for instance, I could hit the Alt key and erase, and I can just turn around and try to erase some of the edge. Not going to be quite as nice, but I mean, oops, I'm erasing, erasing more than I wanted there. But to try to make it soft after the fact is tough to do. So you're better off to try to draw soft if you need to, and draw a soft line. And if you need to harden it, maybe just come along and reduce your feathering, and just trace around the edge and try to make it a little harder if that's what you want to do. If you want to make it really, really hard, then I can do dot, whoops, hit the shift key, 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 hit the shift key. And so I end up with that type of thing. So I'm making it a hard edge, but I've done it after the fact. So these are different things that we can do. All right, so let's do some oh, I'll come back to that. There's somebody can remind me. There's an extra little thing that you can do with the two graduated filters is if you draw a circle, you can actually augment it with a brush. So let me give you, let's just reset all of this, and I'll give you a very simple example. I'll draw my circle, I'll make it really hard. So there's a hard circle, and then I want to put something else. I want to put a tail or something on this thing. I can hit brush. Now I'm hitting not this brush up at the top, I'm hitting the brush within the graduated filter. So new filter, edit filter, brush. And now I can turn around and do pretty much what I was doing with the other things. I have feather, flow, and density again, but I can do something. And what I've done is I've actually, I'll just draw another one, what the heck. What I've done is I've made all of this one object. It's a circle with a bunch of appendages. So now when I draw it, make it brighter or darker, I'm affecting all of it at the same time. Had I drawn those little fingers with a separate tool, I'd have to make each finger a separate adjustment. So I'd have to go through and make each one darker. So now I can affect the whole thing together. It is a little tricky, however, when I start to move things around. There's my circle, but wherever I drew the fingers, they don't come with my circle. They're not kind of connected. So it's one of those obscure things that you kind of draw it and you think that's what you have, but when you go to move it, the circle is the only thing that's really important. The rest is almost like an afterthought. This was added in a recent version of Lightroom. So it's nice to have, but it behaves in a kind of a strange way. The same thing is true if I reset and I do this thing. I drew one of those and then I say draw, pencil or draw, and I draw a couple of extra little things in here. And then if I want to, I can hit the Alt key or the erase and I can erase some of it. Okay, so now I have a graduated filter with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate drawings. And if I change I want to edit this thing. So I want to edit it. So I want to reduce this or move it. But guess what happens? I'm moving the graduated filter, but the pieces I drew separately don't show. Right? And the reason this white thing is disappearing is because this says erase whatever's there. But if I take what's there away, then I'm erasing nothing. So you can see how, it can get a little tricky as we go along. So I'm gonna hit reset. And let's just put some of these in action. And then some of it will be reinforced. So before I go too far, any questions on what we have so far? That's good. And let me just check to see. I don't have my chat open.
Mike, I wanted to know if that can be used. I have a photo that I really like, but the sky is white, white, white.
Yeah.
I can use that to...
We'll talk about some examples of that.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
and you'll see that we can, in fact, do some of that. Let's, should I do that now? No.
There is
Okay,
no
let me introduce. Let's just do a simple example, and then we'll go from there. So here's something that I went ahead and did some changes on, and I'm currently on the graduated filter. Okay, which is the straight line one. And you see a couple dots. You'll see one dot here. So there's obviously something that I've done to the sky, and there's another one here off on the side. So I've got two graduated filters, and I'll go over here and hit my circle. Okay, so my radial filter, and I'll see, oh, there's one here, there's one here, there's one here, there's one here, and there's one there. So it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 radial filters on here. And if I look at this guy, the adjustment brush, I don't see any. Okay, so there doesn't appear to be any adjustment brushes here. So to try to see what you've done after the fact, if you don't remember, you've got to look for those little dots. And if you've set your little button here to off, then you won't see them. So I'm going to reset this photo. And so there's my original photo. And what you probably just want to do is set the overall exposure. Okay, so I hit auto, and the exposure is adjusted a little bit. I probably cropped this a little bit. I don't remember what I did, and I don't want to necessarily get back to where I was, but just give you some quick examples. So you asked about the sky, so I can just bring this down and say, okay, there you go. I've made the sky darker, but I've also made part of the building darker. So there are a couple of options, right? One, I could use the brush, and I could turn around and hit the Alt key and erase what I've done. All right, and now I've just really just affected the sky, and I've taken it away from the building. It looks like I missed a few. Now here, the O key, the letter O on your keyboard, shows you what's painted. And you can see right here, I'm missing a little piece, so I can actually go ahead and erase some of that. And my brush is probably a little too soft, so I might make it a little less soft. And I can hit the space bar and just go around this roof line just to try to reduce that. So now I can even go up here, there, whoops, and erase portions. So I'm just affecting, and then hit the O key again, and I can see that I've affected the sky. And I can make it a little darker, lighter, and then this isn't pure dodging and burning, but I mean, I can also affect the sky, right, and make it bluer, and I can make the sky more crispy with more dehaze, and I can do all kinds of stuff, but we're just focusing on dodging and burning today. So I just made it darker without necessarily changing the color. So one of the techniques that you can use is just paint over the areas and unpaint what you don't want. So that's one way of doing it. I could have, in fact, delete. I could, in fact, have gone over here and try painting in the whole sky, right? But the problem is when you try to do that, and I'm being very sloppy at the moment, but when you start to do that, even if you start to see, right now it doesn't really show too much. There's a little bit I missed, and there's a little bit I missed. But if you hit the O key, you can kind of see sometimes a little bit what you've done, what you haven't done a little bit better. Because if your change is very, very subtle, then it's hard to see that you missed a spot here or there. But the O key is there. And the letter O, by the way, separates to a default color. If the color you've got is the color that's already there, you can hit the Shift O and change the color to other things. So there's a couple of different colors: white, green, red, and blue, I think, are the defaults. I tend to work on faces a whole lot, so green works for me. You know, it always stands out nicely from somebody's skin. Okay, so you can paint something, you know, in great detail. And I'll just keep going here. I'll hit letter O and I'll say, okay, the side of my building's just a little bit too bright. So I'm just gonna take this circle, I'm just gonna put it there, and that's a little bit too dark. I'm just gonna lower that. And then this portion of the building's also a little bit dark, and I'm gonna lower that again. And maybe this one's a little bit still too much. I'll bring it down. And this looks pretty bright over here. And if you find yourself adjusting over and over and over again, what you can do is say new, adjust it first, and then every time you draw, it's at the new level. Okay, and then this one maybe is a little bit too dark. I'll reduce that one a little bit, make it a little bit brighter so it's not quite as dark. And so I've really brought, if you look at the effect, and the other thing, the building's bulging in and out. I have lens correction turned on. I guess I'll just turn that off. There we go. And now if I hit the slash key and I just go back and forth. And you can see I've made quite a dramatic change to this picture. This is probably a little bit too much over here. I can hit this one and then go back to basic and reduce it a little bit. Oh, here's another little interesting trick. And why is that not showing? My exposure, okay. I'm just going to bring the exposure. Oh, okay. Hang on. This is an area where you want to be careful. Basic is your overall sliders for the overall picture. I need to be in the circle. So now this is the menu for the circle, and it comes to the end, and then there's basic at the very bottom here. So you want to make sure you're in the circle. Then you want to click the appropriate one. Once you've clicked the appropriate one, you can adjust it. Okay, now you're just affecting one. Now the trick I wanted to show you is, let's say you'd played with a couple of things. You've made the exposure a little bit lower, you've raised the contrast, you've made the whites whiter, you've made the blacks blacker, you've improved the clarity. You've done a bunch of things, but it's a little bit too much. Rather than trying to mathematically figure out how to reduce all of those by a certain percentage, there's a funny little arrow on the very top of your sliders here. If you click on that, it reduces everything to just one overall percentage. And it says, this is approximately what you've got in effect. But if I lower it from 56, which it is now, to a little bit less, I've reduced the effect. But what you've done, in fact, is you've reduced every one of those sliders by a fixed percentage. So you've reduced them all at the same time. So you're really taking the effect and you're just minimizing it or magnifying it by the same amount. Okay, so that's a nice little tool that you have over here. So there's kind of a before and after, and it took me very little time, but you know, this picture has a little bit more punch, a little bit more impact than what we had before. So, and I did that just with painting circles, and I don't think I used the graduated filter at all for this one. No, I didn't. And oh yes, I did. Hang on a second. I did the graduated filter. We did it for the sky, right? Did we use a graduated filter for the sky? Or did we? Oh, we took it away and I painted.
You did it at the beginning, then took it away.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad somebody's sitting here with memory. All right. So let me show you a couple of tricks though that we can use so that we're not always painting. So I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to use this little guy. And so this is just a light gray background with an orange ball. So I want to turn this into a sphere. So I'm going to turn around and say, okay, if it's a sphere, it should probably have a hot spot. So I'll put my circle in place. I should call these by the right names, the Radial Filter. And I'll turn around and I'll hit the Shift key and I'll just draw something over here and I'll say da-da, and I'm going to maybe brighten it. And I'm going to feather it a whole bunch. And there you go. I've got a nice little hot spot. Okay, so I'm trying to make this ball look more like a sphere. I'm going, you know what? It should probably be a little darker in the edges. So I'm going to draw another circle, but this time, rather than having the inside of the circle white, I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate it only because I want it to be in exactly the same spot. It's just going to be easier for me. So I'm going to duplicate it. Now when I grab it, I'm going to hold the Shift key and I'm going to make it bigger. And instead of white, I'm going to make it black. And instead of the inside being black, I want everything on the outside circle. So the inside is white, and it's going to get darker, 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 darker till it hits this line, and everything outside is going to be black. So I'm going to invert. You see the difference? Now I have something that looks more like a sphere. Now the argument might be, well, but you made everything black, not just the ball. Well, I could turn around and I could try to erase it and hit the brush key. Whoops, and then try to hit the Alt, and I can try to erase everything and try to be very precise. That's going to be really tough. So a really, really neat trick is automatic masking. Automatic masking says, where do you want this? We said it starts at 0 and goes out to 100%. And that's because of the invert, yes or no? Where's the invert? Oh, I'm on brush. Okay, I have to go back here. You can't invert the brush. Edit, I have the button, and there's my invert. So this is invert in and out. And the way I remember it, by the way, is IN, invert. IN, if it's checked, means inside. If it's not checked, then you're doing the outside. So here's a really neat trick. I want this mask to start here and go to 100%, but I don't want it everywhere. I only want it on the orange. So I'm going to say, I want this mask to be affected by a certain color. I'm going to pick up my eyedropper tool. I'm going to say, this is the color I want it to be affected by. And voila. I have just made my mask affect only the orange and nothing else. So here's the before and after, and you see quite a difference. So what I've done is I've got two circles there. One's a black one that starts here at 0 and gets darker as you go out. And just for added impact, I have the white spot in the middle. If I were to get rid of the other one, I'll just move this one aside so I can get rid of this guy. I'll just, I'll leave it there for now. And put this guy back. And you see, he's still there, but the white dot just seems to be missing. This really gives it, a lot more punch. And if I want to get to the black circle, unfortunately, when the dots are on top of one another, it's really tough to come on, get there. I'm going to make this one a little bit darker. And then I'm going to take this and put it back on top. Come on, go back. So to edit something, you've got to be able to get to the dot. So I can't get to one dot when another one's on top. So that's one of the challenges. Sometimes you have to move one away to get to the other one. Same thing, if you wanted to take this circle and make it smaller or bigger. If there's another dot like this one, very, very close to the edge, sometimes you try to grab the edge of the circle and you can't grab the edge or grab the handle because there's another dot nearby. So you sometimes have to be a little finicky, move something out of the way, move something else, move it back. But what the heck, it's pretty interesting. You can do a fair amount in Lightroom just with the types of things that I'm showing you. And quite frankly, I go to Photoshop maybe only about 5% of the time. Almost all my photos are edited, 95% of my photos are edited in Lightroom only. So we can get a fair amount of stuff going on. So another little, so that's the trick I want to show you is the fact that we could highlight just certain colors. So let's go back to our sky here.
Excuse me, Mike,
Yep,
can I
go for it.
interrupt for a moment?
Yep, go for it.
Is this video going to be available later? Because I don't want to have to repeat that. I don't want people to be bored. That was really interesting, and I'm not sure I got what you just did. Will we be able to refer to this again?
Yeah, I have, in fact, turned on the record, and it should still be recording. And do you see a record button on your screen somewhere?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then it's still happening. And I will just post that on the meetup group.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, oh, no problem. So here's my picture, and I'm trying to see, what I'm looking for is where we painted the sky. I have to hit this guy, and I'm not seeing the button I need. Oh well, what I'll do is I'll just
Mike, it was in the trees.
in the trees. Do you see it?
Yeah, go down more to the side, right
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Somebody's got sharp eyes. All right, I'll just delete that. And it doesn't look like we did very much, but I will take the graduated filter and I'll just come down and I'll do that. Now I'll say range, color, and I'm going to pick, whoops, I need my color picker. I'm going to pick the blues from the sky. And voila, I've pretty much affected the sky. Hit the O key, and you can see just the sky was selected. All right, so now I can turn around and make the sky, you know, darker, lighter. I can turn around and, you know, give myself a, you know, an orange sky, you know, change the saturation, modify the clarity, whatever, right? There's so many things I could do. And if this portion's not going deep enough, I could take it and right here seems to be stopping. And if I want it to go a little deeper, I could just bring this down. Now the risky part is, let's say there's the blue that's in the sky is also down here. Maybe some of this starts to be impacted and you don't want it to be impacted. Well, guess what you can do? You can hit the brush. You can hit the Alt key. So now I'm erasing, and I could just erase it from down here just in case it's affecting area I don't want. So using these tools, you know, adding and subtracting from these tools, you can get a fair amount of stuff done. So it's a powerful enough tool. So this business of automatic masking, I'll show you a couple of different ways to deal with that. I'll come over here. So here's a printer range, and you can select based on color, like we just did the sky. I want a blue sky, but you can also turn around and select on tonal range. So I'm going to take this filter and I'm going to say, whoops, there we go, I've selected it. And I'm going to draw something. Now, if I draw something like this side of the page is affected and this side of the page isn't. So I'm just going to do something like make it really, really dark. Okay, so one side of the page is being affected. Now, if I want, I say, well, I really only want that to happen in the light areas. So I can say, I want to do this by luminance, and I'm going to pick a color that's very, very light, and I'll actually go, you know, down here somewhere. I can't actually see what I'm doing, but I'm clicking through, and what's happened is it's only, whoops, it's only happening in certain areas depending on what I've picked on. So let me just do this to make my life really easy and show you. I'm going to take this, and this is a trick I sometimes use. If I want to affect Okay, I'll back up. If I want to darken this whole thing, but only in certain areas, I can come down here and say, hey, make this picture darker. And I'm making the whole picture darker. But now if I say, well, I want that to happen, but not in this area, I can't, because this is my overall exposure. So instead, I sometimes use this tool, and I use this tool, and rather than drawing on the picture, I draw off the edge of the picture. Boom. And I'll hit the shift key just so it's straight up and down. Okay, so now what I've done is I've got something which affects the entire picture. But I can say, not here. Whoops. There we go. And brush. And I can say, but not here. All right, so now I'm turning around and I can affect portions of it, and weather, feather, off, off, off. So I can take portions of it away, but I can also undo, 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 undo. Another way to do it is with this range mask. So I can say luminance, and I want my overall effect to be very, very bright. And I'm going to change my luminance range to a very narrow range. And watch what happens when I move the slider around. You see how portions of the screen are being affected? And if I make it really, really dark, then the same thing. My luminance mask, I'm affecting this. At this end is black, at this end is white. Now I've affected everything. But if I say don't affect the whites, I take it away, don't affect the blacks. And if I want a very wide range, I can say, I'm just going to make it right there. So right here, I'm affecting this area right here. So take a look at what I'm affecting. See, this is the only area that's affecting, from about color 251 to 243. Okay, so that's what I'm affecting right now. Now, if I want to make it wider, I can widen the smoothness. And now it's going wider and wider. So this is narrow. 248 is kind of my center point. 248 to 251 and 248 to 245 is kind of what I've highlighted in this very narrow range of colors. It's not pure white, it's not pure gray, it's kind of that in between. But if I want to go from that center point wider, I can just do this and I get a wider area. So you can play with luminance. You can go in and change it to color and say, I only want this color, but I mean, everything on this chart is the same color. It's just different intensities of the same color. So it's a little trickier. But if I want to do something here, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, same trick. I'm going to come all the way down here and I'm going to make this black. Okay, yeah, there we go, black. I've made everything black. Well, I'm going to say, well, except for one color, I don't know what color I'm going to end up picking. I ended up picking that one. So that color that I picked is that color and everything around it's black. I can narrow the range or I can widen the range. And if I make that whole thing white, it's still the same range, but it's been affected. Now, if I change that range to this one, or I change it to this one, or I change it to this one, all I'm doing is I'm taking my graduated filter, which is off on the right-hand side here, and it says white, 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 make everything bright, 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 bright. So any color I pick is that color ends up turning white, and the others are unaffected. Now, if you hold the shift key and you select 2 colors or 3 colors, you can select more than one color at a time. So you've got some very powerful masking capabilities. And if you want to widen the range, all 3 of those colors are going to get wider. And now you have a bit of everything till eventually you select the whole picture and the whole picture turns white. So tough to get your head around some of this, but you can see just how powerful this is. And if you want to select a range of colors, you can do it the way I did it and just, click one and click another and click another. To get more than one, you hit the shift key. And the other thing you can do, undo, is you can drag and drop. So I want everything from this color to that color. And hold the shift key, and I want everything from this color to that color. So now you're not just collecting one color, you're collecting a range of colors. So if you want to go back to your sky example, when I dragged across the sky, I dragged from dark blue to light blue. So I was getting a bunch of them.
Mike, is it when you speak about shift and stuff, is it the same thing for Apple? Sometimes with Apple and Android, it's not the same thing.
So shift is always the same for Apple and PC, but what's different is the Alt and Control. And the Control is always, and somebody else over there will know this more than me, the Control is always the Command. And Alt is always the Windows. Is that the right way to do it? Who are my Mac users? There's a pure translation. Whenever it's Control, I'm pretty sure whenever it's Control, it's Command on the Mac, and whenever it's
Control
shift,
is Mike. Control is Command, and the other one it's Option for
Option. Okay, so Control and Command are the same. Option and Alt are the same, and Shift are the same. So I'll hit reset here. Okay, and now if you start to use intensity with this type of map, then that's very different because you're not talking about color anymore, you're talking about intensity. So I'm going to, do I still have my, oops. I need my graduated filter. I need to find my, where's my button? I don't see, oh, I got rid of it. Never mind. There we go. And I'll just reduce it so I can see what the heck I'm doing. And now if I try to do luminance, then I can do, whoops, I drew another one. So the key to remember here is to select this one. Now that's selected, I have to grab this eyedropper tool. This eyedropper tool is what's going to allow me to grab my luminance. So if I pick that luminance, then it doesn't look like it did very much, does it? So the luminance, it looks like this diagram has got pretty much the same luminance everywhere. Doesn't matter where I pick it, it always seems to be. Yeah. I use color a lot. I don't tend to use luminance a whole bit. And the last one, by the way, in here is called depth. If you take a picture with like an iPhone or some other program, some other phone that has multiple lenses, and the lens can tell, because you've got parallax built into your lenses, it can tell what's sharp and what's foreground and what's background. You can say, take the background of an iPhone picture and make it lighter or darker or whatever. And so it's actually operating on the depth information of the photo, which you can't get with DSLR and cameras that only have a single lens. There's no depth registration. So you can do things with phones that you can't do with your $5,000 cameras. Imagine that.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, could you pick a few photos? I know you only got about 15 minutes left, but specific photos where you could see how this stuff can apply.
Yep, absolutely. So let's go ahead and use some of these. So here's something I found in Costa Rica. I'll hit the reset button. And essentially this is fairly bright over here. So I'm just going to take this portion of the picture and just, whoops. And just, whoops, and that's obviously not what I want, but I'll just darken that portion of the picture. That was maybe, I need a little bit more at the bottom here. There we go. I still have a hot bright spot at the top. I'll just do that. And okay, just darken that a little bit. I want the snake's face to be a little bit brighter. So I'll draw another new circle right here. Come on, Mike. And I'll just bring this a little bit bigger. When you're sliding these sliders, by the way, if you find, oh, that's too bright, that's too dark, that's too bright, that's too dark. Another little tip is you hit the shift key, and now it becomes like a more fine tuning. You can break, when you move it left or right, you're moving it much more gradually. And so there, my snake now is the face is a little bit brighter. Some of these hot spots around the edges are gone, and the snake's a little bit more. If I think maybe I need a little bit more, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to take this area here and make that maybe just a little bit brighter. And you know, there's still a hot spot here. Make that a little bit darker. And you can have as many of these things as you want. There we go. That's so I've just made that one, you know, and hit the shift key, and it's subtle, right? And you can play with it the way you want. And I did this one before, and here's the done. And so there's kind of the two different versions. And I just created little snapshots as I was going along. Here's another very typical image. And I'll just say reset. And obviously that's a heavy crop. Okay, so I'm just going to go all the way back to here. So here's again, a little trick. Control Shift copy. I want to copy something. You know, I want to copy everything's go off. Just copy the crop. And say copy. So I've just copied just the crop. I'll hit reset. Now Control Shift V, and I've reapplied my crop. So I just trying to remember where I was, just so I can go backwards on something. So now I'm going to do just an auto, just adjust the overall image. That's still not too bad. I'll hit the circle, draw around the bird, darken. Gee, I'm not darkening the inside of the bird. That's not what I want. Invert it. That's okay, but that's way too. I need it feathered a whole bunch more. That's no feather. That's a lot of feather. And then I'll reduce the whole thing. And then essentially my bird becomes my center of interest. Right. So and then maybe the bird's face is just a little bit too bright. I'll just draw a little circle here, and it's just darken that just a little. Oh, I have to do the inside, not the outside. And I'll just darken. Now, if you want to darken, whoops, I want the inside of this. And there we go. Now, let's say it's darkening too much, and it's darkening the blacks. And I'm really just trying to get the whites. I've drawn my circle. I can, in fact, say lower the highlights. And now I'm lowering the highlights just inside that circle. As opposed to changing the overall exposure, I'm just reducing the highlights. I can just boost the shadows. So now I've just boosted the shadows just on its face and reduced the highlights just on its face. So if you want to see the effect, I'll double click, and it's gone, undo, and put it back. And it's pretty subtle. I don't know if you guys can see that through your screens. I mean, I know it has to go through Zoom and all that stuff, but you can get sort of undo, redo, and you just get a little bit of that effect. Here's another one. Come on, go. All right, and so let's just crop rectangle. Okay, so here's my overall exposure. I'll just retrace my history. I added a graduated filter, updated the graduated filter. There's another graduated filter, so I'm playing with graduated filters on the side here, updating the contrast on the filter, adding a radial filter. It's changing the exposure on the outside. And you see as I go along, another filter. Say all these update radial filters, I'm making a little darker, I'm making a little lighter. It's just subtle changes to the filter. I'm just maybe just every time I change the contrast a little bit, or the highlight a little bit, or the shadow a little bit, I'm adjusting this filter. And here I have a brush stroke. Whoops, where did it go? I missed it. Oh, here, brush stroke, brush stroke. So there's some little brush strokes. So I'm probably somewhere on this filter. I'll hit the O key. And I might be adding or removing something, like I'm using this brush to kind of remove something or add something a little bit on the side. So I'm trying to get a little bit more of a fine tuning. And there's my overall snapshot. So this is kind of my before and after. So this was backlit with the butterfly fairly dark and the background not blown out, but you know, brighter than I wanted. But the sun was just coming from the wrong direction. and you don't have a flash, you don't have a reflector, you're just out in the middle of a holiday. And so this is the end result. So you can get some fairly dramatic results. So let's put some of these things together in a more interesting fashion. I'll hit, there's my before and after. Okay, so I'll hit reset. And so I'm going to do the overall things first, right? I mean, I really liked what was happening is I was walking down a dusty road. I saw a truck coming towards me, kicking up dust everywhere. I could see the sunlight in the background. I went, oh gosh, this caused really nice God rays and all of this dust. But, you know, the camera's, you know, at my side, bring it up quickly, go click, 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 and you know, try to, whoops. So I'm going to go to my basic and hit auto. And just get my overall exposure, maybe, you know, warm it up a little bit, you know, boost up my overall shadows, and you just make the picture more or less the way you want. But then you say, okay, so now I'm going to start my dodging and burning. I'm going to take a circle and I just take this area over here and maybe just darken the road a little bit. And then I'm going to, and this was a fun little thing. So I now have my adjustment brush. I'm going to brighten the lights a little bit, and I'm just going to draw straight lines, but I'm going to hit the shift key, click, click. Well, that's obviously not very nice because it's too harsh. Undo, and I'm going to bring my feather like way, way up. Bring the size down a little bit, square bracket key, square bracket, there we go. Density, I'll bring down a little bit. My flow, I'll bring down a little bit so I can play with this. And I just go click, 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 click. And I'm following these rays. Okay, now if I want, I can really bring them up, and you can see what I drew. And obviously I didn't draw them very straight, but you can see where I drew. But the point is I can start impacting these rays by color, by amount, by clarity, and I can start amplifying the rays as I'm going along. And then I can take another brush, new, and I can go from there to there and make these darker. So I'm actually creating a couple of, exaggerating some of the dark ones. I mean, if you were really good, you could actually create your own rays and they didn't have to be there. But all I'm trying to do is amplify what's already there. And that's probably too much. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you're doing. So here's kind of the, by the time I was done, this is the overall effect. So actually, let me go back to where I was. And clearly I had a lot more blacks in there. And, oops. And a lot more color punch in there. And starting to look a little bit more like the other image I had a moment ago. So you're and then where's my white ones? So they're there. I probably could use a couple more white ones in there. So I'll just start a new batch. I'll say new. And I'll go here, here. Now remember the first batch I did, they're all going to be tied to this pin. So now I have a new pin, and this pin I can make independent of the others, right? So I can make a batch that are really, really bright and a batch that are less bright. And I'm going really, really fast here, but the idea was to follow the line and try to not crisscross because that doesn't look very accurate. All right, and let's go over here and show you some dramatic effects. So there's before and there's after. So I'll just hit a reset on this thing. And clearly I have to do some cropping or whatever. Boom, you do your overall image, you know, make a little bit darker, whoops, that type of thing. And what did I do here? I probably just darkened this edge over here. I ended up doing something like this. And just a bright spot. And then I made it actually a little bit more yellow, maybe even Maybe even put a little touch of yellow in there. I don't remember. That's a little bit too much. It'll do for now. And then I can just say, duplicate that and copy it over here and make it a little bit smaller. Duplicate that one, copy it over here, make it a little bit smaller. Duplicate that one over here, make it a little bit smaller. And I'm noticing as I'm duplicating these that they actually look better when they're duplicated. And I'll just do that for now. So I'll duplicate this one again and make it a little bit, whoops, I clicked the wrong button on my stylus. And now take this guy, duplicate it, and make it a little bit smaller. Duplicate him. Come on, undo. Undo. There we go. Click, duplicate. And something like this. And her face is, and you'll see that I'm very easygoing with it. You know, in Photoshop, you think you have to mask and so on and so forth, but I'm just going to make her a little bit brighter, and I want to make her a little bit more on the yellow. And this side of her should be more yellow than the other side of her, so I'll probably just duplicate this again, move it over, reduce this a little bit. Rotate it a little bit, make it a little bit more yellow again. Maybe take the whole thing, cut across the whole thing, double click, make all of that like yellow, and maybe increase the contrast. Yeah, we're getting better. So now this dot here that I had for her, I'm going to make her just a little bit brighter and increase the shadows. And if I find that there's still too much of a vignetting, not vignetting, halos around her, I'll just turn around and feather this a little bit more. Right, so now some of that feathering, some of that stuff that was in there was gone. Reduce that, maybe move it up, maybe even make it a little bit smaller. So I'm slowly building up to what I want. This side of the picture is still looking a little bit too bright, so I'll just move over there and just darken that a little bit, because as you get further and further away from the lights, it should be darker. Yeah, maybe make this a little bit bigger. And you see, I'm just building this up a little bit at a time. Come on, go away. Duplicate this one. And by duplicating, I'm kind of maintaining my settings, you know, pretty much all the same on all of these things. Once I have one that I like, I kind of just do all of them. And sometimes, you know, this looks like it's got a hot spot there. I'll just draw an extra circle in there and just draw that one. And so you start to build up your overall image. She's still not quite bright enough. I'll do another new one for her. And so these things are additive, right? Whoops. See that I ended up drawing another circle because I was trying to grab this handle and I missed it. And so I want, in this particular case, I want the highlights to be a little higher. There we go. I want her to be a little bit more yellow. There we go. And the whites, see, the whites are too much now. I'm going to bring them down. I'll bring the shadows up a little bit. There we go. She's starting to look a little bit better. And just to brighten all the lights, I'm going to draw another one. I'm going to draw a very long circle. I'm going to rotate it. And I want to put an overall glow on the overall thing. Now, some of it's hitting her over here. So I'll hit the brush, hit the Alt key, and just erase it over here. Oh, actually, I like that. So I'll go back to undo. I'll erase that, but I'll leave it on her face. When I erased it, I went, hey, that's not good, but I actually like it on her face. So that gives you an idea of, and I'm doing this really quickly, but you can see, you know, how much of a dramatic effect that has on the overall image. So I'm going to do a couple of faces, and that'll kind of just wrap up the technique. But if I look at this one, here's my start, and here's my dodge and burn, and you'll see it's very, very subtle. Okay, and all I'm doing is, I'll go back to my start picture, and I'm taking my brush, I'm setting my exposure up a little bit. I'm setting my density about halfway, my flow I'm going to keep fairly low. And using the techniques that we had earlier, I might zoom in a little bit. You know, I want to brighten some of the circles underneath the eyes. So I'm just going to paint in underneath the eyes a little bit, and it's getting a little bit brighter. And this area of her eye gets a little bit lower. And I'm actually going to bump up the flow a little bit just to go faster for you guys. It's not going to be as nice effect. You're better off to build up slowly. And the people who are really, really good, man, they can actually, just by dodging and burning, they can get rid of pimples instead of using the clone brush or anything like that. They just lighten the shadows and you know, darken the highlights, and then they can actually get the effect that they want. So I'm going to brighten the eyes a little bit. I'm just going to bump this up a little bit and brighten the eyes a little bit. And then I'm going to go Z, and then see the highlights in her hair. I'm just going to highlight those. And so if I change this exposure, I'm changing everything, right? It's all the spots that I did get really, really bright. I don't want to change that. I want the highlights to be a little bit brighter. So now I'm just going to bump up my density. And then I'm just going to do so that the density in the hair will be a little bit more than they are on her skin. And just adding some highlights in her hair. There's a highlight here on her hand. There's another highlight here. I'm going to add a little highlight in her dress here, a little highlight there. And I'm just following the highlights. And if you're like me when I started, I would watch these videos and I would say, what are they doing? I don't see anything. You know, like he just seems to be, you know, painting, but nothing's happening. And I'm doing this rather fast. And then I'm going to create a new one, but this time I'm going to go on the dark side, and I'm going to darken the cheeks and a little bit on the forehead, and a little bit over here and down the side of her hand. And I'm going to follow this shadow here and this shadow here, and maybe give her a little bit more cleavage, and I'll highlight the dark parts of the clavicle. And I hit the space bar, and then I'm just going to darken the eyebrows a little bit, and back to done. And you just take a look at, okay. Unfortunately, it's going back to my color. So let me just go back to, I'll create a new point, new, redone. Control N is how you create a new snapshot. So now this is where I am. I just did redone, and we hit start before I went going. So there's before and after. And you just take a look at some of the highlights on her cheeks come up. And you know, I think this is overdone. But again, if I want to, I can find my button, which is my highlight. I think that was the, see, I can tell when I push my mouse close to it, the little green pops up. I can see that those are my highlights versus those are my shadows. So I can hit this, and then I can just reduce the overall effect a little bit. And by doing that, I'm changing exposure. So everything is being done. The highlights in the hair, everything are being done by the same amount. If you wanted to have more control over her face versus her highlights in her hair versus the highlights in her dress, you start a new one of these. You do a click and you do her hair. You do a click, you do her face. You do a click, you do the body. Now you would have a pin for every single one, and you could update them. So let me just wrap up with some quick befores and afters, and you'll see some pretty interesting effects. So before and after. And this is just dodging and burning. I'm just darkening things, and occasionally I'll add a temperature boost one way or another. Just giving it a little bit more punch. All of the detail that was up at the top here was distracting, so I just got rid of that, made it a little darker. Same thing on the side. So all the emphasis is on the staircase. So as I'm doing these, any questions as we wrap up?
Maybe a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to know if it is possible to have the exact value of a, I think we call it tonal value in Lightroom, like the number between 0 and 2000 and 255.
Total value of what?
So I want to know to put to know the amount of light in highlight, for example, and I need to want to know the value. That is, if I want to be very precise.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if you want to know exactly how white the white of her eye was, like, you know, is the white of her eye 255 or 253 or 252?
Yes, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I can't think of an easy way to do that. But there's no sampler eyedrop. I mean, the closest I can do is I can put my mouse here, and on the near the histogram,
yes,
you can see that your red is 91 and your green is 90 and your blue is 83. You could translate that into something in Photoshop if you wanted to.
Okay.
Okay, so right here, for instance, I could see that, you know, I've got 94, 86, and 73. Whereas over here, I've got numbers, you know, like something over here would be low numbers, like 9, 3, 0. And over here, I've got numbers that are all closer to 100. And I think pure white would be 99.9, 99.9, 99.9.
Okay. Thank you.
So this is one where, if you remember the makeup guide, you'll see that her you know, the contours of her nose are a little bit darker, her cheeks are a little bit darker. Okay, her eyebrows are a little bit darker, the forehead is a little bit darker, the center line of her nose is brighter. So it's just a little bit of contouring just to give the picture a little bit of extra punch.
If you, yeah, Mike, if you
Yep.
subscribe, you know, to Adobe there, do they have good tutorials on this kind of thing?
The Adobe ones are more how to use the tools, you know, the specifics of, you know, when you click on this button, it does this.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a lot of, like, you know, here's how you would, you know, contour a face. So I find there's a number of other people I really like. Amish for Pix and Perfect is really, really good. Lightroom, there's less people. I really like Serge Ramelli, does some really, really good stuff with Lightroom. And he actually sells a bunch of presets that are kind of neat. So if you go to Serge Ramelli, you'll find he's even got a bunch of presets, and he does some really interesting things with his presets.
Mike, you can, on the tone question, you can get the tone by using the tone curve. There is a selection, and then you can see what the light value.
Interesting. Okay, so here's the tone curve. Click on that, and then I can come here. So I can see that this is 255 by 255, and this is 7. So to the question, that was a tone curve between 0, which is black, and 255 right, you could actually use this portion. So that's a good one. I appreciate that, Pierre.
That's nice. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure how I would use it, but anyways, for those who are not familiar with the tone curve, this button lets you pick something. So if you want to increase the value of these curtains, you can just click on this, come over to the curtain, and it says, oh, these curtains are value 121. So anything in the picture that's 121 is going to get darker or lighter, and everything else relative to it, of course. But it gives you, rather than guessing what you're going to lighten or darken, instead of just picking a spot over here and I want to lighten and darken, and you don't know what you're lighting and darkening, you can double click and you can say, I want to get, you know, this tile to be a little lighter or darker. And the same thing is true if you want the reds to be a little bit lighter or darker. You can hit and say, okay, I want a little bit more red in these tiles, or a little bit less red in these tiles. So you get that overall effect. Other questions?
Oh, so much to learn. No, that's good.
That was really good, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Like drinking from drinking a little water from a fireman's hose.
Yeah,
exactly.
But in a good way.
A great appetizer here.
Ah, there you go. Okay, folks. Well, thank you very, very much for your attention. Let me just see if there's anything in the chat that I might have missed. What are you using for before and after? That was the slash key. It's the slash key right next to the square brackets. Inverting the filters. So you can invert the round one, go from inside to outside, and you can invert the graduated filter by rotating it 180 degrees. The other one, the one where you draw, to draw the inverse of that, I'm not aware of an easy way to do that. And okay, somebody had responded to the other chat. That's good. Thank you for your help. Everyone participates. And need to go. Okay, fine. And I think that's about it. So I will process the recording and put that up on the event page. And I'll put it up somewhere where it can be viewed by people. Maybe if it'll fit, I'll put it up on YouTube. That way I don't have to keep it on my hard drive and Dropbox forever.
Where do you find it on YouTube?
Sorry?
Where do you find it on YouTube then?
If I can get it, if it fits on YouTube, I will
send us.
I will put the address on the Meetup event link.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Stop recording.